Some of you may know me as an entrepreneur, but today I'm coming to you with a message that definitely won't sell on Wall Street, but in my opinion has more value than Fort Knox, Silicon Valley, and the Big Apple combined. And the topic couldn't be more important: our children. Parents are realizing that Jesus Christ and the Word of God are relevant to all of life, 100% of life. Keeping their children in state schools is not an option. So let's take a few minutes to discuss how and why the church and its leadership can provide a solution, and why trying to revive the dead duck of state education is not a possibility. Giving our children to be educated by the state has been catastrophic, and now it's time to do something about it. Yes, you can glue feathers on a dead duck all you want, but it still won't be able to fly. What am I getting at? In 1983, a landmark study was published titled A Nation at Risk. This report made it very clear that American schools were failing, and it touched off a wave of state and federal reform efforts. But today, decades later, everyone knows the nation is at even greater risk. Our problem is not with the feathers, but the duck. We killed it. The public school system is dead. It's tough to get back to the basics of education when the real basics have been eliminated, even outlawed. So what are the real basics? Let's start at the beginning. Planet Earth and everything in it belongs to the Lord. He owns the chair you're sitting on, the room you're in, and the air you breathe, the food you eat. He owns every credit card in your wallet, and he owns the banks that process your every transaction. The Lord sustains the electronic pulses running through every computer and cell phone on Earth. He owns the trees and stars and rivers and seas. It's all his stuff. The temporal and the eternal, the seen and the unseen, are his. This fact, this truth, provides a unified field of knowledge and a unified view of everything. Let's call it a uniview. I think we can agree this is basic Bible 101. Not only does God own the earth and everything in it, He created people for the purpose of managing it. God made it very clear in Scripture that humans are to rule over the planet. In Genesis chapter 1, God told the first humans to fill the earth and subdue it. David said in Psalm 8, "You, Lord, have crowned humans with glory and honor. You have made them rulers over the works of your hands." In reality, we are God's deputies on assignment with an earth-sized jurisdiction, and God never rescinded that assignment. It was His first commission. And with that commission, let's understand that the true purpose of education is to equip the next generation to rule well over this material world. I repeat, the purpose of education is to equip the next generation to rule well over this material world. Now here's another mind-bending basic. There is no secular world, and there are no secular subjects.
Whoa!
God created all things good in the beginning. Even though it got messed up in Genesis 3, He still is creator and sustainer of everything, and still holds all things together by the word of His power. Whatever is profane in this world is a twisted distortion of God's good creation. Yes, we live in a broken world that needs fixing, but it's still God's world, and there's nothing secular about that. Show me a single place where the Creator is irrelevant, and I'll show you the so-called secular world. Show me any subject matter that can be divorced from its divine origin, continuing existence, and God-ordained purpose, and I'll show you a secular subject. But there is no such thing. Every fact has context, and it's the context the Creator provides that we have eliminated from public education. I'm not as concerned about students in state schools becoming atheists as I am about students becoming dualists, with a split view of reality in which a so-called secular realm functions quite well on its own, where 98% of life happens, and so-called sacred spaces are confined to personal prayer or to what goes on in church on Sundays. They have no unified view of Christ's all-inclusive domain and their role in it. The biblical UniView has been forgotten. It's gone. It no longer exists in public schools, and sadly, it's rarely even mentioned in most of our churches. But since Christ's ownership is over all, how can he be irrelevant to banking, science, the environment, or the public square? This is what's called the sacred-secular divide. It's a mental virus and can be deadly. Yes, Christianity is very personal, but it's far from private. That's because Christ is not private. He's relevant to 100% of life. This is where America got off track in the 1800s when we cracked the door open for the privatization of Christianity by separating Christ from math, science, history in secularized state-run schools and restricted him to one's personal life and church. But 2 + 2 = 4 has a divine purpose, and that purpose helps us to rule well over planet Earth. Teaching this purpose is now against the law. Prior to the mid-1800s, formal education in America was mostly the concern of the church and distinctly Christian educationalists, such as Noah Webster, one of our founding fathers, the schoolmaster of the Republic, and the author of Webster's Dictionary, a UniView masterpiece. But through state-run education, America divorced Christ from every subject in the schoolhouse and relegated him to a very narrow, private sphere of life called religion. Christ was okay for church and the prayer closet, but nothing more. We buried the truth that the entire earth is his and all it contains, from Main Street to Wall Street and everything in between and beyond, including the state itself. The founders' concept of separation of church and state has been grossly distorted. Yes, separating the church from state control and not allowing the church to control the state is definitely what the founders wanted. But separating Christianity from the practical functioning and maintenance of the state, our institutions, and our culture was not even on their radar. How do we know? The U.S. Supreme Court of 1892 said, with no less than 87 precedents, our laws and our institutions must necessarily be based upon and embody the teachings of the Redeemer of mankind. It's impossible that it should be otherwise. In fact, in 1831, the well-known French historian Alexis de Tocqueville came to the U.S. to find out what made America tick. And in his subsequent book, Democracy in America, he wrote, "The Americans hold Christianity to be indispensable to the maintenance of Republican institutions. This opinion is not peculiar to a class of citizens or to a party, but it belongs to the whole nation and to every rank of society." De Tocqueville further documented, "The Americans combine the notions of Christianity and of liberty so intimately in their minds that it's impossible to make them conceive the one without the other." Now that's a UniView. It wasn't like this in France. The United States was surprisingly different. We were, that is. Webster said any system of education that neglects Christianity is essentially defective. And now, not only is the duck dead, but the whole culture is on life support. The children were infected by a new religion without God, called secular humanism, which was promoted by John Dewey, a committed atheist, secular humanist, and the father of American progressive education. He rightly called secular humanism a faith. Yes, a religion. And the children, as well as their parents and pastors, bought into the bogus idea that a so-called secular realm was not only necessary, but desirable. What we must realize is that the sacred-secular divide, a supposedly neutral and public replacement for Christianity, is actually anti-Christian, and there was no wall of separation between Dewey's godless religion and the public schools. We were conned. The whole country was conned. In 1963, when the Supreme Court banned mandatory reading of the Bible in government schools, Justice Potter Stewart argued that this decision led not to true neutrality with respect to religion, but to the establishment of a religion of secularism. By the 1970s, secular humanism had thoroughly displaced Christianity at school. And over the next 25 years, a firm foundation was laid for the cultural Marxist twin towers of race and gender theory to be erected in the schoolyard, starting in 1995. Yes, the secular supremacists got their way in the 1960s and 70s when dualism became law in our schools and the biblical uniview was officially banned. But here's what we absolutely must understand. Adding prayer and Bible reading to public schools now will not fix things, as long as dualism rules in the classroom and the biblical uniview is banished. As long as dualism is the rule in the 97,000 public schools of America and the biblical uniview is outlawed, no real fix is possible. State-run education under current laws cannot be reformed. Yes, you can glue feathers on a dead duck all you want, but it still won't be able to fly. The duck has been long dead. So, is there a solution? Oh, indeed there is. Parents can take their kids out of public school. Churches can partner with families to create thousands of new learning centers all across the nation. There are roughly 350,000 churches in the U.S., which is 3.5 times the number of public schools. The infrastructure is already in place from coast to coast. But we need pastors who will embolden parents to remove their children from schools that are infected with SSD, the sacred secular divide, and work with these same parents to create affordable alternatives, such as homeschool cooperatives, outsourced homeschools, online schools, neighborhood learning pods, micro schools, and yes, brick-and-mortar schools. And teachers, if you're called to be a Christ-following teacher in a public school, then stay there and be one. But don't be silent when it's your turn to speak, and never be willing to teach a lie. It may cost you your job, but standing on the side of truth is often costly. No one can command you to do what God forbids you to do. Dr. Francis Schaeffer said, "Truth carries with it confrontation. Truth demands confrontation, loving confrontation, but confrontation nevertheless." Failure to deal with our root problem, the sacred secular divide, will mean more of what we now have, a self-absorbed society that's turning in on itself with greater ferocity with each passing year, destroying itself through a collective cancer unlike anything we've experienced before, but not unknown to many forgotten civilizations in the dustbin of history. Some have said 5% of people think, and 15% of people are starting to think. And 80% would rather die than think. Well, sadly, it appears 80% of the American church would rather die than think, being asleep at the wheel and oblivious to the real battle. Or if they do know what's going on, they're just too fearful or intimidated to take action. But then 5% of the church understand that Christ cannot be restricted, confined, and quarantined to church or a private prayer closet. This 5% could actively commit to creating thousands of educational alternatives. And by supporting the ones that already exist, we can bring up the next generation with God's truth clearly on their minds and resolutely in their hearts, starting in preschool. So let me ask you, are you in? It's time to restore the uniview. Parents, grandparents, pastors, and educators, we have our work cut out for us, that's for sure. With God, all things are possible. Let's restore the uniview, God's uniview. As Abraham Kuyper, the Dutch theologian and former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, put it, there's not a single square inch in the whole domain of human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine.